Aperio is a nonprofit consulting firm with a vision for a world in which everyone can thrive. We exist to unleash the power of communities to drive change by dramatically expanding resources for nonprofits. Day to day, we work alongside community leaders and fundraisers to develop simpler, faster, and smarter ways to generate the revenue for nonprofit missions. Our client services provide strategic advisory, hands-on support, and embedded fundraisers to organizations nationwide. We are excited to host a three-part series this summer, the Relationship-Based Fundraising Toolbox, where we will be going back to the basics of relationship-based fundraising. Today's webinar will focus on the fundamentals of organizing your list. As questions come up, please submit them via the Q&A tool, and they will be addressed at the end of today's session. It's my pleasure to now kick it over to our facilitators, Kelly Bronig and Tony Koch.
Thank you, Travis. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first session of this summer series, where we will be focusing on organizing donor lists. Summer is the season of organization for development teams. It's when we're stepping away from our busy day-to-day and preparing for the year ahead. We believe that your mission, your donors, and your team have more potential, and that's why we're here, to help make it simple for you all to realize that potential. As you'll hear today, we're passionate about going beyond just great ideas. We know that the challenge is less often what we are doing, but rather how to get it done amongst all of the competing priorities. Since our firm was created, we've been listening, learning, and distilling what works into a clear roadmap that any nonprofit can follow. The building blocks of that roadmap are your people, having a clear business model, and a culture of philanthropy. We work alongside organizations large and small to implement this roadmap and unlock new fundraising potential. My name is Kelly Bronig. I'm a senior director here at Aperio Philanthropy. My career has been spent focused on leading strategy in the development operations space for many nonprofit organizations. I'm especially passionate about helping organizations level up their operations and implementing efficiencies to create a solid foundation for their development teams and ultimately better serve their missions. I'm here today with my colleague, Tony Koch. Tony, I'll kick it to you for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Kelly. My name is Tony Koch, and I'm a senior director here at Aperio. I've built a career in relationship management and fundraising for international nonprofit organizations of varying sizes and stages. And at Aperio, I specialize in helping smaller or newer organizations create a strong foundation for sustainable fundraising growth.
Thank you, Tony. Today, we're going to focus on organizing our list. The question that we're really asking ourselves in this exercise is, who should be hearing our case for support? We're going to walk through how to approach segmentation, how to identify high potential donors, how to prioritize those high potential donors, and how to segment everyone else. A few housekeeping items off the top. You may have noticed that we are recording this session. We're going to turn the recording off when we get to the Q&A section at the end. Feel free to start dropping your questions into that Q&A so you don't forget them, and we'll begin addressing them at the end of our presentation. We're going to start with the big picture here, how to approach segmentation. You may have already have organized lists or a way that you're approaching your donors. What we want to call out here is that your database has more potential. You may have heard from some donors that they are not currently in a financial position to give, or they're focusing on other causes right now, while there are others who are looking for more ways to get involved and they just don't know about your opportunities yet. As we're shifting to relationship-based fundraising overall, we're going to see that additional potential has been in your database all along. In my career personally, every single database that I've encountered has held at least 2 to 3 years of untouched dynamic revenue growth found just from thinking and approaching supporters in new and different ways. When we're talking to boards and new clients, what we often hear is our database is stale. We need to acquire new donors. And while that may be true for some organizations, our experience has shown that the real need is to make investments in acquisition be more effective. Most orgs' acquisition channels are direct mail, special events, peer-to-peer, and DIY. What you'll notice about these is that with the exception of DIY, these are the most expensive fundraising channels. The cost to raise a new dollar typically is 40 to 60 cents when you're factoring in staff time, and those are expensive dollars. Unfortunately, we get so focused on the next mail piece or the next event or the next fundraiser that we're often overlooking ways to bring the donors that we already have acquired into the family in meaningful and sustainable ways. The stats that you see here on this page show us that on average, nonprofits are retaining about 45% of donors year over year. That means we make our case to existing supporters in a way that inspires 45% of donors to renew their gift. That means that 55% of donors do not renew. If your organization does not yet have a middle or major giving program, your retention rate is likely much lower. And clearly retention will not ever be 100%, but every percentage point increase is representing significant revenue. And additionally, a reduction in the cost to raise a dollar because retention is less expensive than acquisition, of course. In case you are not yet worried about those stats, here is another stat. Pursuant has created a donor loyalty benchmarking study where they dug into the data of over 20 organizations and found that 62% of donors in their database had only given one gift in their lifetime. The question that we always ask organizations that are hot on acquisition is, what exactly are you acquiring for? If you're not willing to invest in the systems and people to engage, inspire, and ask donors for renewals, then it's hard to say that there's a point in acquiring new donors. The profit on a first gift is minimal or even negative in some channels. The real value of a donor comes in their lifetime of giving. For these organizations, the average lifetime giving of donors who were retained was over $1,000. If 30 of those donors had remained engaged, that would be 30,000 more for the mission. If 300, it would be 300,000 more. And if 3,000, 3 million more, and so on. A donor that we don't engage in is not just revenue lost once, it is ultimately revenue lost for a lifetime. And you may be asking yourself, what does it take to renew a donor? To stay engaged, donors don't need fancy technology. They really don't need big events. And ultimately, what we're getting at here is that they need you and your team. They need you to do all the things that we all know to do, right? We're needing to provide timely acknowledgements, meaning within a business week at most, ideally, updates throughout the year about how their gift is making an impact, ways to get more involved and excited and inspired by your missions, opportunities to meet other donors, which can be where your events come in, but they don't need to be big productions. They just need to be interactive, and opportunities to meet with you either in groups or one-on-one. The list goes on. They need you. This all sounds great, but there are so many donors. Are you wondering, how do we handle this when there's only one of me or just a few of us on the team? How are we supposed to provide all of this for everyone? Well, that's what we're here to answer. So enter segmentation. Segmentation is a fancy word for organizing your lists. It means we are grouping your current and prospective donors into a handful of lists. That way you can create plans and experiences for groups of donors. These experiences will be efficient to plan, but will feel robust to the donor. The impact for the donor is there. Your personalized moves management will layer on top of this, but it can be much more focused since you've already created a great experience for your donors. segmentation really is one shared strategy for the whole organization, not just specific portfolios. So it is holistic for the entire org. And what we're focusing on is clear engagement framework for each segment, clear roles and responsibilities, and a clear process for moving donors between segments as needed, depending on their activity. From your organization's perspective, an organized list combined with an engagement plan, which we'll discuss at the next session, ensures that a few things happen. No donor is falling through the cracks, and all donors are treated well, but not equally, meaning that you create special opportunities for donors as they're growing in their impact towards your mission. And finally, everyone internally knows their role and plays it. So engagement is simple and seamless, and it's not confusing. It's not a hassle to get each mailing out or each cultivation event planned. More importantly, at all times, the donor will feel that their gift was used well and as they intended. Their partnership is making a difference, and they can see that, and that they have a role in the future of your mission. Okay, time to get into the details. Here's the process that we're going to walk you through today. Choosing your segments, identifying your high potential donors, prioritizing your high potential donors, segmenting everyone else, tagging your segments in your database, and then finally assigning owners and making your plan. One note before we get started, for simplicity's sake, as we walk through this today, we're focusing on individuals. To include companies and foundations, you'll need to do the same process, but figuring out your high potential donors will require a bit more research, understandably. If you have mostly institutional donors, follow along to kind of understand the logic of what this flow looks like, and we can schedule a session together to talk through how we could make this process simple for your organization. So the first thing off the top here is choosing your segments. In this step, we're asking two things. Who are you trying to reach? And who are the ones that need special treatment? We like to start this process by just taking a look at the database holistically. We look at things like the number of records that you have, the number of donors in the past 3 years, the number of 1K and 10K plus donors in the past 3 years specifically, average gift size, and retention rate. Those are just a few. This helps us understand the starting point of where we're at. You can skip this step if you don't have a way to get to your data, but we do highly recommend it. We also can produce a report for you with all of the key information that you'll need for this exercise, and also to make data-driven decisions about your fundraising strategy. So when we're segmenting donors, there are a lot of factors that we can consider. Some examples are recency. When was their last gift? How long have they been giving? Frequency. How often are they giving? How many gifts have been given in their lifetime? Type. What type of gifts do they make? To events, peer-to-peer, directly to the mission? Kind of what does that look like for them? Of course, the amount. How much are they giving? How much was their first gift, last gift, largest gift? Those data points are key. Their potential. What's their estimated giving capacity? What are they giving to other organizations? And how philanthropic are they? Then we're looking at motivation. What drives their giving? What drives their giving specifically to us? And interests. What interests them in our mission? What are their interests, more generally speaking? And there are a few ways to approach segmentation. The first is just using the giving data that you have, but we recommend starting with the second, and that is using your giving data that you already have, plus some sort of wealth screening tool. This is the method we're going to walk you through today. If you do not have access to a wealth screening tool, contact us and we can screen your records for you with our tools. And if you are used to segmentation and have an established stewardship program already, you've got digital programs, you can shift to the dynamic segmentation that we're showing on the right here. That means that rather than grouping your donors into the same segment all the time, you are continually segmenting for the exact audience that you need. You're providing highly personalized donor experiences. And this example that we have up on the right is Pursuance Giving DNA, which is a platform that we recommend for advanced segmentation as needed. I'm going to pass it over to Tony to talk through how to identify our high potential donors.
Thanks, Kelly. So now that we know about some of the tools available, we're going to dig into how we actually identify those high potential donors. You might be thinking, why start with high potential donors? And the reason is the 80-20 rule. In general, in most things we do, but especially in fundraising, 20% of work is responsible for or drives 80% of the results. So what that means for us is 20% of donors are typically giving 80% of the revenue. So we should be spending 80% of our time and investment on that 20% of donors. That's why high potentials are our first segment to identify and why we spend most of our time today talking about them. So when we're identifying our high potential donors, we're asking ourselves, who are the 20% of donors to focus on and where are our biggest growth opportunities? The high potential donors that we identify are going to require super special treatment. So we are only going to identify as many of them as we can manage effectively. So we'll ask, how many donors are we looking for? Here are the standard recommendations based on your staffing structure or capacity. So if you have 150, if you have a full-time major gifts officer, each one of those gift officers should have 150 individuals or institutions in their portfolio. For a dedicated institutional giving fundraiser, you might be looking at about 75 to 100 institutions there. And then in a blended role, you'd be looking at 25 to 50 per blended role, meaning that they have additional responsibilities in addition to their frontline fundraising responsibilities. For executives, you're looking at 10 to 20 each. So an ED or CEO would have a 10 to 20 person portfolio, as would a chief development officer or VP, and those would be supported by other individuals on the team. And next we'll ask, who are we looking for? And there are two ways to think about this. Most organizations focus on past giving as the biggest indicator that someone should be prioritized for special treatment. And this is a good place to start, but we also recommend focusing on capacity or future potential. For most donors in our database, there's a big gap between their current giving level and their real capacity. That gap is your growth opportunity and your best growth opportunity. So when we create our short list of high potential donors, we don't want to focus on people who are already giving at their highest level. We want to focus on people with a big gap or a lot of room to grow. For major gifts, as well as foundations and companies, then our definition of a strong prospect is capacity plus. So that means that capacity is the non-negotiable, whether we see it in a wealth screening, giving to other organizations, an individual's net worth, or other indicators. We have to have some reason to believe that that person or organization has the ability to make a large gift. The plus piece means that capacity is not enough. So just because you have money doesn't mean you want to give it away. And just because you do want to give it away doesn't mean you want to give it to this particular mission. So our process will be to create a short list based on capacity alone, and then choose from that list the people with the most plus indicators. Here are some examples of what plus can look like. They might have given a first gift larger than $250. They might be philanthropic, meaning they give to other organizations. Maybe they gave recently. They might be responsive. So every time you reach out or send a specific communication, they get back in touch with you. Outright giving, meaning they support your mission and don't just give to events or peer-to-peer campaigns. They might have expressed interest in your mission. They might have a mission connection. Maybe they have a child who has been a part of your university, or maybe they were an alumni of a specific program. They might have a connection to the community that you seek to serve. And they might be involved as a volunteer. And they might be involved in other ways with your organization. Maybe they are a board member or a past board member. So there are lots of different plus factors that we can consider. So in summary, the people or institutions we should be prioritizing should be those with high capacity, those who have demonstrated interest in your mission, and who are giving beyond events. All right, now that we know how many donors we're looking for and what we're looking for, we'll pull a list to review. On this slide, you can see the export to do from your database on the right-hand side of the screen. You'll want to pull fields that allow us to explore gift recency, frequency, and monetary value or amount. If you have wealth screening information already in your database, pull it into this list. If not, export the rest of these fields and then get that list wealth screened by a research vendor or us. Only people with addresses on file can be wealth screened, so focus on those, but don't remove high dollar value donors without addresses from the list. If you have a large list and you're looking to make it more manageable, you can filter out people with a first gift that's under $250 or under $100 if you're a newer nonprofit organization. And you can sort out people who haven't given recently, let's say in the past 3 years. And from here, we can use Excel filters and sorting to whittle the list down to a size that we want. Capacity, as previously mentioned, is the non-negotiable part. So first, look at your wealth screening results. Here we have the rankings that several screening tools use called gift capacity range. These rankings are for 5-year gifts. So we've done the math here for you on what 1 year looks like. Now we're going to select the categories that we're interested in. We recommend making your cutoff a bit higher than your major gift level for 2 reasons. One is your wealth screening tools are a bit optimistic about what people are willing to give away. And 2, it's rare that you'll be someone's only charity. So if somebody has 200,000 1-year gift capacity, that is going to be split amongst other organizations. And it also might be a little bit of an overestimate compared to what they'll actually give away. So for example, if your major gifts level is 10K, we'll want to look at people in the 20K per year category as individuals with major gifts potential. So that 10K major gifts level again there. And then this is what we're looking at in terms of a 5K major gifts level. We'll want to really focus on that 10K plus 1-year capacity range. So now look at how many people you have left. I would compare it to the goal list size you came up with, the one that's based on the number of people that you have in your organization who could have donor management responsibilities. So for example, if you have 1 fundraiser and 1 executive director, we're looking for 170 high potential donors, 150 for the fundraiser and 20 for the ED. Once you do the capacity step, there may be 350 names on the list to consider. Usually at this point, your list will be bigger than what you are looking for, and that's a good thing. One way to whittle it down further is to exclude another capacity category. So really focus on the higher end of that spectrum. You can also start isolating people with the most plus factors, such as people whose first or last gift dates are not event related, because we all know that gifts directly to the mission have a higher probability of renewing, or people with the highest number of lifetime gifts. You can do this using filters, or if you know your donors well enough, you can do a manual review. And if you need more donors, you can add a capacity level back in. There are other also ways that you might be able to kind of expand your list, thinking about other recency and monetary amounts as well. Usually to identify high potential donors, I create an extra column in my sheet and put an X next to the names I want to flag as high potential. That helps when I'm filtering and trying to make my list bigger or smaller. And once I've arrived at the list size I want, I cut and paste my high potential donors into a separate tab or workbook so that they don't get mixed up with the rest of the list for the next steps. At this point, you can also add the name of the staff person who will be responsible for this donor as the relationship manager. If my ED is going to manage a list of 20 donors, he should be listed as the relationship manager next to 20 names. One thing to note is that the relationship manager is not necessarily the person who is doing all of the relationship building. Think of the relationship manager as the quarterback or the person who's in charge of the strategy and experience for the donor, which can include involving teammates such as the ED in the process. So now we're going to talk about how to prioritize those high potential donors. When we are prioritizing our high potential donors, we're essentially asking for the list I'm responsible for, or for which I'm the relationship manager, who are the 20% of donors to focus on, and how will I manage the whole list? This is where tiering comes in. Tiering is a time management tool. It helps us know how to engage with donors based on their current giving and their capacity. And there's more than one way to approach this, but we recommend focusing not only on people we currently know well or who are current potential or current big donors, but also those people with the most potential. So as you can see in our illustration here, we use 3 tiers. The top tier is the smallest and the bottom tier is the biggest. When we think about our tiers, we define tier 1 as your top 20 donors in terms of growth potential in the next 12 to 18 months. These are the people with the biggest gap between their current giving level and their potential, if you recall the visual from a few slides back. Often these are current major donors with even greater potential to give. Sometimes it's someone whose multi-year pledge is ending that we want to approach for a renewal or an upgrade. Sometimes it's someone who's only given to us once or at a lower level, but we know the capacity and plus signs are there, like a mission connection, major philanthropy elsewhere. They have a specific interest in our work, or they're willing to take a meeting. We define tier 2 as established donors who are likely to give again in the next 12 months. These are your recurring major or close to major donors and people paying off multi-year pledges. You can also include board members here. And lastly, we have tier 3, which will be everyone else you are getting to know this year. You may know some of these people personally, but not yet their philanthropy. Others may be new names to you. Either way, by including them on your list in tier 3, you're setting the intention to spend time on them this year in the hopes of moving them into a tier 1 or a tier 2. In other words, tier 1 is your top source of growth potential this year. Tier 2 is your top source of retained donors and upgrades. And tier 3 is your top source of newly engaged or re-engaged donors to build your pipeline. We have put the highest potential in the short to medium term in the top tiers. And that means the top tiers is where we will put our highest focus according to our 80-20 rule. High focus means a highly personalized experience. We will give an excellent experience to everyone, but we'll spend the most time working with the top tier donors individually. In terms of how to do the tiering, you have 2 options. The first is manually, 1 donor at a time. Most people use this approach because it allows you to build on your existing knowledge of the donor and the relationship. Alternatively, you can use a batching process and then review manually. This is the process that we tend to recommend for small shops or for situations where you just want to start tiering quickly, which mostly involves a lot of filtering and sorting in Excel. You can look at capacity and giving history, including gift amount, gift recency, and gift frequency to make decisions about how to prioritize donors. So we've gone through how choosing your segments, identifying your high potential donors, and prioritizing those donors. Now we'll chat about how to segment everyone else and some next steps. Core segments are based on donor potential and relationship management strategy. So you'll see here that every donor belongs to exactly one of these. If they're in your major gifts portfolio, and tiered. Otherwise, there'll be a middle donor, meaning that they give it a certain level that's below your major gifts that also warrants special attention. And then everyone else are your general donors. So middle donor tier A are major donor, have major donor gift potential, and they might be a priority for one-on-one and one-to-few touch points. And tier B are other existing middle donors or individuals with higher capacity. So those donors end up in a middle giving segment when you run out of room in your major gifts portfolio. So in the example from earlier, we had a list of 350, but only enough people to manage 170. Those other high capacity individuals could end up in your middle donor portfolio or segment. And then your general donors are everyone else. There also could be special groups. So some donors might belong to one or more of these. And these are, again, some of those more advanced segmentation opportunities here. We might have monthly donors or sustainers. They might be somebody who's a program alumni, anybody who volunteers with your organization, event supporters. You can segment by specific mission interests. So all of these opportunities are available for tagging in your database and tracking and creating specific communications or strategies based on those special groups. So middle donors can be where you place your major donors or individuals with capacity if there's no room for them in portfolios, as I just mentioned. It's also where anyone with lower capacity or people currently giving at a mid-level donor level should be assigned. So depending on the size of your database, you might be looking at a middle donor segment of a few hundred to a few thousand. Middle donors that are not select, or sorry, major donors that are not selected, and then the rest of the capacity tiers. Sustainers or monthly donors, they get their own segment so that we can provide an elevated experience to this group of donors through one-to-many management. And these also can include recurring annual donors. And then lastly, general donors, again, everyone else, they get their own segment so that we can ensure they receive the baseline experience through one-to-many touch points. You can also segment by last gift date and apply a specific LIBUNT or last year but not this year, and some year but not this year strategies for more targeted communications to your general donor segment. So to recap, we went over choosing your segments, identifying your high potential donors, prioritizing your high potential donors, segmenting everyone else, tagging, and now we'll talk about tagging segments in your database. So to tag segments in database, we're looking at those major, middle, and general donor categories. And we use this to support tracking donor experience by segment. Again, more to come on this in 2 weeks, so that you know who receives what treatment. The next step is to assign owners. So make sure that every person in a portfolio has a relationship manager. We recommend having at least one next step planned for everyone in your portfolio and up to 3 next steps planned for tier 1 donors. And I will pass it to Kelly for some key takeaways.
Thank you, Tony. So just a few things to remind you what we just talked through in the past 34 minutes. We covered segmentation and are hoping that you walk away understanding that organizing your organization's list into a stable, manageable number of groups is ultimately what segmentation is for you. We want you to be focusing on people with high capacity who are engaged with your mission and ideally giving beyond events, and that using middle giving and general donor segments is there to ensure that no donor falls through the cracks. So that's our quick key takeaways. I am going to open this up for the Q&A. So please feel free to drop any questions that you have into that Q&A function. And let's see here. It looks like we have a question around how often should I be refreshing my donor list? So we generally recommend working your portfolio for at least 12 to 18 months. And a caveat to that would be if someone directly asks to not be contacted anymore, of course, in which case you would remove them. Additionally, if you receive new donors during that time that need to be added to portfolios, that can happen during the 12 to 18 month stretch. We recommend having an annual refresh plan in place where you're looking at the same things that we talked about today. Did they give at the same level? Did their giving increase? Decrease? Are they engaging and responsive when you're doing your outreach? All of those things should come into play as you're considering your portfolio.
Yeah, I think we have another question on, do you have a mid-level donor model available? Yes, we do. I can chat a little bit about that and then happy to continue the conversation offline for anyone who's interested. But typically within the middle donor segment, so again, everybody who doesn't fit into major donor portfolios or who's currently giving at your mid-donor level belongs tagged in the mid-level donor segment. Within that, if you have a person on your team who is able to dedicate time to managing a smaller subset of those individuals, we recommend elevating a short list of, again, depending on if it's that person's full-time job to do that work, you might identify about 200, 250 people from the top of that list based on the major donor potential individuals for them to work more like a major gift officer would work a major gifts portfolio. So more one-to-one or one-to-few touch points. And then the rest of the segment would get put into your kind of baseline experience from a general communications perspective with occasional layered on touch points from that middle giving donor manager. And that would be specific appeals, for example, throughout the course of the year, or specific touch points that would be geared to them and from that person.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. Okay, we have another question here. It says, we are starting from scratch. Normally we've gotten our donations through grants. How can we start screening potential donors without an actual database? We work with a number of organizations that are not yet in a database and are functioning from spreadsheets of different kinds. And you can absolutely start screening from those spreadsheets. Ultimately, we can have a conversation about what it would look like to get that information into a place where it is accessible by your entire team, depending on what your team size is. But utilizing one of those wealth screening tools externally, iWave is one of them. We kind of sent through on the slides that we'll send over to you by the end of the week. But you can pull that and you can incorporate that into your list of any donors that you have, any potential donors that you have. You're able to take the information that you have from them, if you have any contact information, their name, and then just incorporate that together. Doesn't have to be in the database to start. Tony, is there anything you would add to that question?
Yeah, I would also just say explore, we'd like to think about 3 levels of connection. So obviously the first one would be people who are already giving to your organization. The second one would be people who those people know. So it could be your board or volunteers. How can you engage them in helping you generate new names of potential individuals who might be interested in the work that you're doing? And then the third layer would be cold prospects. So you could take a look at doing some prospect research to identify potential high net worth individuals or high valued institutions that have the alignment that you're seeking with your mission to be able to work a list of cold prospects. That would also, again, be part of that acquisition strategy. Okay, I think we have another question here. We have some issues with how to treat ongoing stewardship or recurring annual and non-responsive major donors versus moving in major donors or prospects. Any thoughts? This is a great question. I think this is also a common question, like you have people who are giving at a major donor level, but they don't want to meet with you, or they're not that responsive or engaged in your mission, but maybe they continue to give. So we see that frequently. Next time in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about donor engagement planning, but just as a little preview and to answer the question, we really do want to think about providing a baseline experience for all donors. So having ones that you can really like do on a one-to-many approach, and then using that baseline plan to layer on additional touch points. I think what you're also asking about is like bringing in new major donors or prospects while navigating the ones that aren't as responsive. So I think doing some real intentional work, working to take that capacity information and look at lower segments. So your middle giving or your general donor segments, and being really intentional about the people that you choose to potentially move into a major gift portfolio would be an option to talk about a little bit further. And then maybe work them on a more one-to-one approach and see if that does anything to help them feel deeper engagement, or give you the opportunity to sit down and have a meeting with them, get to know them a little bit more, get to understand what their philanthropic priorities are and how they're giving.
Great. And then I see another question in the Q&A tool, Kelly. What does tagging look like in the database? We are currently in the process of transferring our data over to Salesforce.
I love this question. We work with so many organizations moving from really one CRM to the other, and plenty that are moving from one CRM to Salesforce specifically. So the person who sent in this question, I would love to have a one-on-one conversation with you. But tagging primarily is a little bit simpler than it may seem. We need to have an option for a drop-down for your tiered donors to be tagged specifically. So that would involve taking that exported list that has had your wealth screening information incorporated into it and importing it back into Salesforce. Prior to doing that, we want to make sure that you have a field for portfolio, tier. We can talk about what the different naming conventions look like for your organization specifically, and tiering out exactly who they are. At that point, we are then creating reports and dashboards, right? We want to make sure that we're now utilizing this information that we've worked so hard to get and to organize. We are going to take it and create a report that now shows you who's in your portfolio. You're pulling info from that field. Who are your tier ones, your tier twos, your tier threes, et cetera. So you can make those data-driven decisions. Additionally, on the wealth screening side, again, it's having a field and that information imported to show what wealth screening information came through. What is their 5-year capacity? You want to see that. The fundraisers want to see that as they are engaging with your donors and prospective donors. First thing on that account page. It's key.
Great, thank you, Kelly. So taking a look at the Q&A, we have one now for Tony. So can you offer any advice for a membership-based organization? We have a large database of people who identify with our work and mission, but very few of them make additional donations beyond their annual dues.
Yeah, I kind of have a follow-up question, but also I'm going to make some assumptions about my answer to this. So one would be that you obviously maybe have some capacity information about them in terms of being able to know that they have the capacity to give additional gifts beyond their membership. And then I would recommend kind of the same process that we walked through today, and identifying a short list of individuals who do give annually, because again, they clearly identify with your work and your mission, as you alluded to in your question, and then use that same kind of one-to-one management approach where we're working to reach out to them, request a meeting, and really understand their philanthropic goals and their connection to your mission. So I would take a very similar approach, but I would use the membership piece as a plus factor.
Okay, and then we have another follow-up question for you, Tony, and then I'll give one to Kelly afterwards. So would you prioritize donors who have given more money to peer-to-peer, or donors who have given less but direct to mission?
That's a great question. I would say probably the latter, but if there's capacity. So remember, like, capacity is the non-negotiable thing. So if there's capacity, but they've still given a smaller amount directly to your mission, that's another plus factor. So that person, even though they have a smaller gift, they have kind of 2 plus factors, meaning, like, I would also look at recency, like if they gave recently to your mission, that would be a plus. So I would say for people who give peer-to-peer, they generally give because of the connection to the friend and not always to your mission. So I would take that into consideration. If there's capacity there and you think there's tremendous growth potential, it could be worth exploring, but I think you have a better shot if you have like limited internal capacity to manage both donors. I think you have a better shot with maybe someone who's already given directly to your mission.
All right, so our next question is particularly for those of you all who do have development operations staff. So how should I be leaning on my development operations team for segmentation?
Okay, so ultimately your DevOps or fundraising ops team is responsible for all of the donor data in your CRM. They can support you by exporting the data with all of the key fields that would be required to add in your wealth screening and then ultimately get it back into the CRM. And then sharing that in a format with you that'll make it as simple as possible to review and put that final stamp of approval on it. They should be project managing and leading the wealth screening process as well. In collaboration with your portfolio managers on your team, DevOps should be updating the spreadsheet with all of your data, confirming that portfolios are agreed upon. And once the portfolios are approved and confirmed, your team of DevOps are responsible for ensuring that all data is timely and accurately added back into your CRM. I mentioned this before, but as soon as that information is back into your database, we want to have reports and dashboards created so that you can start taking action on the information that we work so hard to get.
Great. And I'm going to mix up the order here a little bit on how we're receiving things, but I think it's a good follow-up question to this is on the flip side of what if I don't have any development operations staff? How do I approach segmentation?
Yep, absolutely. That's a great question. There's so many organizations that don't currently have any DevOps or ops experts on staff. And ultimately, what you should be doing is familiarizing yourself with your CRM if you are in that subset that also does not have a database. Just familiarizing yourself with your donor list. You'll want to take a look at some key things. Exporting, what does that look like? Can you get a list out of your database so that you can see all of your donors, all of their information, and making sure that it'll ultimately get back into the CRM? It needs to be in an Excel file. You're then running your wealth screening data solo, and you should be able to follow the steps that we walk through together and make sure that comes along. And it's with each donor, you have their wealth screening data. And then from there, it's ultimately deciding what that portfolio looks like. We are offering free 30-minute consultations afterwards, so we can meet with you directly and talk exactly what this process would look like with the person who sent in the question.
Great. So bringing it back to Tony, how do you recommend handling segmenting general operating versus capital donors?
Yeah, so when we think about campaigns or capital campaigns, we're really looking at asking people for stretch gifts over and above an annual contribution. So Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong or feel free to add on, but I would recommend having a tag in your database that identifies them as a campaign prospect, and then have potentially multiple opportunities in your database, so that you have one opportunity open for their annual gift and then a separate opportunity open for their campaign or their capital campaign gift. Kelly, what would you add, if anything?
Just to make sure that we are keeping on top of this with regular updates so that ultimately when we're looking at pipeline, we understand we are likely going to be landing on one and not over counting, but that's exactly how we would want to approach it.
Great. And I think the next question is actually going to piggyback with the two of you. So Tony, maybe if you want to get us started, and then Kelly, if you want to respond to more of the operations side of the question. So our next question is, we have a large number of people on our newsletter, but they got signed up automatically as they have done one of our courses, maybe even 60,000 people, but it's such a large number and none are donors yet. How would we start the process of reaching out to ask for funds rather than just general updates? So maybe Tony, if you could get us started on how you would approach that asking process, and then Kelly, if you want to respond with anything on what it could look like to take that 60,000 person list and translate it into this shorter list for asks.
Yeah, great question. And I also think that this is something that happens a lot with organizations who have like great communication strategies or really inspiring like missions or updates that they send out. A lot of people subscribe to communications, but there's a missing link in terms of getting them to take the next step and give. My like follow-up question would be, have you asked them, and like, are you making it easy for them to give in those communications? So I would highlight a few times throughout the year. Maybe there are certain like national days, like World Refugee Day, that connects with your mission, and you do a specific appeal to that group of donors on World Refugee Day where you're asking for a specific gift. Every time you ask for a gift, I would really make sure that you're connecting that gift to your impact, and then making it really easy to donate through a direct link in that email. So all they have to do is click through and they land on your donation page. And I would set up, again, a few of those examples throughout the year. Maybe you do something for like those different holidays, or do something that's more like in line with your programmatic initiatives that you run. Maybe you do like a big, let's say you do like ocean cleanups or beach cleanups, and you do a big event, a big cleanup event in the spring, like making sure that you have something around like major moments, both like that relate to your mission and that are specific to your organization, and leverage those as opportunities for people to get engaged by donating.
So my mind is going in a couple of different ways here. I think depending on the setup of your database and what other tools that you have in your ecosystem, there's an opportunity to segment right off the bat. Again, that comes down to capacity. And additionally, I would like to see all of these individuals who automatically got signed up tagged accordingly in your CRM. So we want to understand that they are now in here and a part of our larger donor database because they took one of your courses, and that will help you with reporting when you're pulling through and saying, okay, we have 60,000 additional people right now, but here's how we received them. It allows you to differentiate cold and warm relationships, and then ultimately do what Tony was speaking to, which is how are we going to reach out to them? What type of time are we spending to engage these additional 60,000?
Great. So our next question here is, how do I use my organized list that we've talked about here to activate my board in leading fundraising efforts? Love a board question.
Yeah, so your board has such a key role to play in fundraising. My first recommendation would be to share your organized list with your board and see if they have any connections. So even after you've gone through that tiering process, I'd say I have them review the list and note any connections that they might have with individuals who you're wanting to keep under management. I would also ask them to, it's like a great opportunity to encourage them to like revisit individuals in their own networks. So maybe this helps them think of ways that people might be engaged in your work, or who you're thinking about as a good prospect. And it kind of serves to jog their memory of somebody who they might want to loop into the conversation or get introduced to your executive director as a potential new donor or somebody to add to the list as well. So those are two kind of places to start with sharing out your list.
Okay, great. And then taking a look through our Q&A tool and being mindful, we only have 5 minutes left. I'll go through this last question, but if anyone has any additional questions, now's your last chance before we wrap up today's session. So going through this question is, if I just started my nonprofit and I'm the only one fundraising, should my portfolio size really only be 10 to 20 people? as the ED, or should it be bigger since there was no one else really working on this?
Yeah, so my recommendation would be to take on as many people as you realistically believe that you can manage and manage well. As you'll recall, toward the beginning of the presentation, we noted that doing this one-on-one relationship management does take time. So if you feel like that 10 to 20 is a reasonable number of individuals or institutions that you can engage meaningfully, then I would stick with that. If you felt like you had a little bit of extra bandwidth to take on more prospects, then you can up it. I would say though that just keeping your kind of overall revenue goal in mind, I would make sure that you had a really focused list. So even if you did decide to stick with that 20, you would want that 20 people to have the capacity to help you meet your fundraising goal based on what we know about their likelihood of giving or their giving history with your organization. And if for any reason that wasn't going to be enough to help you meet your goal, then you might want to consider either taking on more people in your portfolio yourself or seeing what other capacity that you can tap into, whether it's through board or volunteers to help you increase your capacity internally to support a longer list.
Okay, great. Well, I don't see any additional questions in the Q&A tool. So first of all, I just wanted to take a moment to thank both Kelly and Tony as our facilitators today for leading today's really dynamic conversation. Also want to take a moment to thank you all for taking the time out of your day for joining us in this conversation. I know lunchtime can be coveted, so thank you all for joining us to talk through what organizing your list can look like. We did get a question earlier on about where you can sign up for subsequent events. So you can go visit our website at aperiophilanthropy.com and go to our events page. That'll link to our Eventbrite. If you used your email to register for this event today, we'll also make sure with the follow-up that we'll be sending out before the end of the week that it will include the links for registration for the next two parts of this series. But again, as we've mentioned at the top of the hour, we'll be sharing both today's recording as well as the PDF of the presentation. And we're also really happy to set up 30-minute consultations with attendees if you have any more specific questions that you wanted to ask our panelists or our team members here at Aperio. So thank you so much and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.